Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The restaurant buzzed with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional laughter that punctuated the evening air. I sat alone at a corner table at Chez Lion, the French restaurant downtown that my wife, Julia, had been raving about for weeks. She mentioned a crucial dinner meeting with a new client tonight, a story that seemed plausible until I saw her walk in. Julia entered the restaurant, radiant in a shimmering blue dress, her laughter floating through the air like a melody. She wasn't alone. By her side was a man I vaguely recognized from the holiday party at her company last December. They were not just walking side by side, his hand was resting on the small of her back, intimate and possessive. A cold, sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I watched them take a secluded table across the room. The waiter approached me, snapping me out of my daze. "Monsieur, may I take your order?" "Just a coffee, please," I managed to say, my eyes not leaving the couple who now sat, heads bowed together, speaking in hushed, excited tones. The man reached across the table, taking Julia's hands in his, and they both laughed at something he said. It was a sound that used to be reserved for me, that laugh. The realization was like a punch to the gut. This was no business meeting. This was personal, painfully so. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check an email while angling its camera toward them. A discreet photo would be prudent, evidence, perhaps, for later. As the camera clicked, a fragment of their conversation floated over to me. "Can't believe we got away with this," he chuckled, squeezing her hands. Julia beamed at him, blissfully unaware of my presence. "Mark is clueless, as usual. He's probably working late or something. We have all night." Their words stung, venom seeping into the wound that was rapidly forming in my heart. I felt a rage building within me, a dark and twisting anger that demanded retribution. I couldn't just sit and watch. I needed to act, to make her regret her deceit. As they continued their intimate dinner, oblivious to my watchful eyes, a plan began to form in my mind. I'd expose her betrayal, ruin her reputation, and ensure that the facade of her perfect life crumbled to dust. She would lose everything, just as I was losing my trust and love for her in this very moment. For the next hour, I sat in the shadows, my coffee long gone cold, watching the scene unfold with a simmering fury. Every touch, every smile they shared, added fuel to the fire of my revenge. I left the restaurant before them, unseen and unnoticed. Tonight marked the beginning of the end for Julia's deceit. She thought she played the perfect game, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. I was no longer just her husband, I was the architect of her downfall. And my plan was just beginning. The morning after the revelation was gray and overcast, mirroring the turmoil in my heart. I sat in the home office, the photo of Julia and her lover displayed on my computer screen, a constant, searing reminder of her betrayal. Today, my plan would take its first breath. I needed allies, and I knew just where to start. I dialed the number of an old friend, someone who owed me more than a few favors, Tom, a private investigator known for his discretion and effectiveness. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mark. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Tom's voice was cheerful, unaware of the storm brewing on my end. "Tom, I need your help with a personal matter." "It's sensitive," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. There was a pause. "You sound serious. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "I found out Julia is cheating on me. I caught her last night, red-handed. I need evidence, Tom. Can you help me?" Tom was silent for a moment, perhaps surprised by the intensity of my request. "Of course, Mark. You know I've got your back. What do you need?" "Photos, texts, calls, I want to know everything. Where she goes, who she meets, everything." "You got it. I'll start today." Anything else? Keep it under wraps. No one else can know, especially not Julia. Understood, Tom replied with a newfound gravity. I'll get on it right away. As I hung up, the first part of my plan was set in motion. But gathering evidence was just the beginning. I needed to confront Julia, to see her lie to my face, to gauge her deceit for myself. That evening, as she returned from work, I was ready, waiting in the living room as she entered the house. Hey, love. You're home early, she said, pecking me on the cheek, her demeanor light and carefree. I studied her face, looking for any sign of guilt. How was your meeting last night? Oh, it was fine. Just usual client stuff, she replied smoothly, hanging her coat. And who exactly is this client? I prodded, watching her closely. Just a company out of state looking to expand here. Why the interest? Her eyebrow arched, a slight edge creeping into her voice. No reason. Just making conversation. I smiled, a cold, hollow gesture. What are your plans for tonight? Just a quiet night in. Maybe catch up on some emails, she said, heading towards the kitchen. I nodded, my mind racing. The lies were effortless for her, her deception a well-rehearsed play. But the stage was mine now, and the next acts would be on my terms. That night, after Julia went to bed, I sat up, plotting each step meticulously. Tom would furnish the evidence, and I would dismantle her life piece by piece. She thought she had control, but she was merely a pawn in a game that she had started but I was destined to finish. As the moon cast shadows across the room, the darkness in my heart deepened, preparing for the days ahead when the storm would finally break. The following week felt like a chess match, each move calculated with precision and cold intent. Tom's updates were regular and damning. Photos, texts, even audio clips, evidence of Julia's infidelity piled up, each piece a confirmation of her betrayal. The time had come for the next phase of my plan, public exposure. I sat in my home office, arranging the evidence into coherent files. As I did, my phone buzzed, an incoming call from Tom. Mark, you need to see this. Tom's voice was tense, urgent. What is it? I asked, my pulse quickening. I'm sending you something, check your email. Moments later, I opened an attachment to find a video. It was Julia and her lover, kissing openly in a park, their actions bold and unguarded. This was it, the key piece. Tom, it's time to go public, I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. You sure about this, Mark? There's no going back. I've never been more certain, I replied. That evening, with Julia at a yoga class she frequented, I took action. I printed out several photos and made copies of the texts and emails. My plan was simple: expose her affair to her friends, family, and colleagues. By the time she returned home, her world would be unraveling. I started with her sister, Amy, someone Julia admired and trusted implicitly. I drove to Amy's house, the evidence in a plain brown envelope. Amy opened the door, smiling. Mark. What a surprise. Come in. I need to show you something important about Julia, I said, my tone serious. Her smile faltered. What's going on? We sat at her kitchen table as I handed her the envelope. I found out Julia is cheating on me. This is the proof. Amy's hands trembled as she sifted through the photos and messages. Her expression turned from disbelief to horror. Oh my God. Julia, how could she? I needed you to know first. I'm going public with this. Everyone needs to know what she's done. Amy nodded slowly, her face pale. I need to process this. I don't know what to say. I understand, I said, standing to leave. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. As I drove away, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The first domino had fallen. Next, I mailed copies of the evidence to her closest friends and some colleagues. The digital realm would follow, but the initial shockwaves needed to be personal, tangible. When Julia returned home that evening, her face was flushed from her class, her energy high, until she saw the look on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her forehead creasing in concern. "Sit down, Julia. We need to talk." As she sat, I placed a single photo on the table, the one of her kissing her lover in the park. "Care to explain?" My voice was cold, detached. Julia's eyes widened as she picked up the photo, her hands shaking. "Mark, Save it," I cut her off. "Everyone knows, Julia. Your sister, your friends, your colleagues. I made sure of it." Tears filled her eyes, her body seemed to collapse inward. "Why would you do this?" "You betrayed me," I said simply. "And now, you face the consequences." I left her there, sobbing at the table. My heart ached, but the plan demanded ruthlessness. The storm had broken, and its fury was all-consuming. As I went upstairs, my resolve hardened. This was only the beginning. There was more to come, and I would see it through to the bitter end. The fallout from my revelation had been catastrophic. Julia's life, once a tapestry of carefully curated moments and relationships, was now in ruins. The days that followed were a blur of confrontations, tears, and accusations. Now, it was time for the final act of my revenge. Julia had moved out after her sister and friends confronted her, the collective weight of their disappointment and disgust too much to bear. She was staying at a hotel downtown, a temporary refuge from the storm I had created. Tonight, that refuge would crumble. I sat in my car across the street from the hotel, watching the entrance. My phone beeped, a message from Tom confirming that Julia was indeed alone. No lovers, no friends. Isolated, just as I intended. Stepping out of the car, I crossed the street, a man on a mission. The hotel lobby was quiet, the soft hum of late-night chatter floating in the air. I approached the front desk, my face set in a grim mask. "I need to see Julia Roberts, room 312, I said, my voice low. The clerk hesitated, then nodded, handing me a key card. "Please, sir, be discreet." The elevator ride to the third floor was quick, but to me, it felt like an eternity. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a dark anticipation. The ding of the elevator snapped me back to reality, and I stepped out, moving towards room 312. At her door, I paused, taking a deep breath before sliding the key card into the lock. The soft click of the door unlocking was like the sound of fate sealing. I pushed the door open. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up, startled. "Mark? What are you? How did you get in?" "I needed to see you one last time," I said, closing the door behind me. "Mark, please, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Sorry doesn't change what you did," I replied coldly. "What are you going to do?" Her voice was barely a whisper, fear etching her features. I pulled out my phone, showing her a document. "This is a confession, Julia. It details everything about your affair, your plans to leave me, everything. I want you to sign it." Julia took the phone, reading through the document, her face paling. "You can't be serious. This will destroy me." "That's the point," I said simply. "Sign it, or I go to the press. I've already talked to a few reporters." Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at me, despair written across her features. "You hate me that much?" "More than you know." My voice was void of any warmth. She signed the document, her hand trembling. Handing back the phone, she whispered, "I hope this brings you peace, Mark." "It brings me justice," I corrected her, turning to leave. As I walked out of her room, I didn't look back. The weight of what I had done, what she had pushed me to do, settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. There was no joy in this revenge, only the bitter taste of ashes. Julia and I would never see each other again. Our paths, once so intertwined, were now irrevocably parted, destroyed by betrayal and vengeance. As I descended in the elevator, a final, chilling thought struck me. In my quest to destroy her, had I also destroyed a part of myself? The doors opened, and I stepped out into the night, the cold air a sharp contrast to the fire that had burned everything to the ground. The chapter of us was closed, forever, in silence and shadows.